So, Jack, everybody's talking about gallium. The Chinese are not going to export or send us any more gallium. How big
Mhm.
of a crisis is this?
The crisis is in electronics. You see, the high frequency electronic devices that are manufactured and used are made from gallium arsenide, a solid material that's used in electronics, and that's we don't know any other way to do that. And up until very recently, we weren't producing gallium. Gallium it can only be found as a trace, and the largest source of gallium would be the trace of gallium that's contained in all aluminum, the aluminum ore bauxite. Okay, here's the problem. Up until let's say 25, 30 years ago, nobody was producing gallium in the West because it's too expensive. In other words, let's say I produce 1,000,000 tons of aluminum. Well, that could produce at most 50 tons of gallium if everything worked out, but it would be very expensive. Okay, so the aluminum companies stopped doing it in the West. Now, of course, where today is most of the aluminum produced? China. So today's world aluminum production is about 50 million tons. At least half of that's in China. So China produces gallium because it wants gallium for electronics, and it goes out of its way to facilitate its aluminum foundries to recover that tiny trace of gallium. Okay, and I don't think that anybody can make a living producing gallium because there's so little of it produced. World production of gallium is probably a couple of 100 tons, 400 tons tops. Here's the interesting thing about it. The largest gallium producer in the West was a company called Recapture Metals in Peterborough, Ontario. And what they did was they took scrap. They found all of the electronic scrap they could, and they were producing gallium. And then they would send it to a company they also had in rural Utah, okay, in a town called Blanding. And at that town, they took the gallium concentrate from Peterborough, Ontario, and they made ultra high purity gallium salts, which then were turned into ultra high purity gallium metal, which was then made into ultra high purity gallium arsenide for electronic chip production. Okay, and at one point, I remember this very well in 2007, they were producing 100 tons of gallium a year, they were the largest producers of gallium I'd ever heard of. Okay, and nobody had ever heard of them. So here's the interesting part. That company got sold to Neo Materials. Okay, and today I don't know if Neo is still producing gallium, but I actually have been to Blanding, and I can tell you that today, most of our gallium is coming from China. Now, I think we need to ask our friend Raheem Suleiman, the president of Neo Performance, if they're still producing gallium. I honestly don't know. They were producing from scrap. I have been told that Alcan, Aluminum Canada, and Alcoa in the U.S., and Century Aluminum are all going to produce gallium. But here's the problem. You can't make any money producing gallium from aluminum ore. So they're going to need to be subsidized by you know who, Uncle Sugar. Okay, we'll see. We'll see if that happens, if they think gallium is important enough, or if the next big issue with pronouns or gender discrimination wipes out the gallium issue. But gallium is a rare material because it's only found in traces in aluminum ore. The Chinese produce all of it today because they facilitize to do it. We can produce it, but of course, as you probably know, Tracy, we're not producing much aluminum anymore in North America. And if we don't produce aluminum, we can only produce gallium from scrap. And I want to tell you, here's the old man Jack story about that. Guess why by the end of the second decade of this century, Neo had to shut down their gallium refinery. Guess what? Okay, you don't know, I'll give you the answer. The United States prohibited the import of scrap containing arsenic because there might be some fish or bird somewhere that could be affected, right? Okay, therefore, there was no source of gallium for the United States. And NEO shut down the works they had in Blanding, Utah. Now, whether that's been rescinded or changed, I really don't know. And, could be another bird or insect affected by this, and therefore no more gallium. It is ridiculous.
Thank you, Jack. And for those of you interested in following Jack's lectures on critical minerals and how to deal with the critical mineral supply chain, go to the criticalmineralinstitute.com website. Thank you.